The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corridors of Fort Meridian, casting harsh shadows that seemed to follow Sarah Chen as she made her way through the administrative building. Her civilian badge swayed gently against her navy blue polo shirt, the simple plastic rectangle marking her as just another contractor in a place where rank and recognition meant everything. The morning briefing had ended 20 minutes ago, and already the hallways buzzed with the purposeful energy of military personnel preparing for another day of training exercises that would push America's finest to their absolute limits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah carried herself with quiet confidence, her steps measured and deliberate as she navigated the maze of corridors that connected the various training facilities. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her steel-toed boots made soft clicking sounds against the polished concrete floors. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her identification claimed: a logistics coordinator responsible for managing supply chains and ensuring that training materials arrived where they needed to be, when they needed to be there. The assignment had brought her to Fort Meridian 6 weeks ago, officially tasked with streamlining the base's equipment distribution systems. Her supervisor had explained that the previous coordinator had left suddenly, creating gaps in operational efficiency that needed immediate attention. The work was straightforward enough: track inventory, coordinate deliveries, manage requisition forms, and ensure that every training exercise had the resources necessary for success. It was the kind of behind-the-scenes support that kept complex military operations running smoothly, invisible to most but essential to everyone. What made Sarah's presence unusual wasn't her civilian status or her technical background. It was the way she moved through the facility with an awareness that seemed inconsistent with her official role. She noticed details that logistics coordinators typically wouldn't: the subtle changes in patrol patterns, the way certain personnel clustered around specific individuals, the quiet conversations that stopped when outsiders approached. Her eyes tracked movement with the kind of systematic attention that suggested training far beyond supply chain management. The first signs of trouble appeared during Sarah's third week at Fort Meridian, manifesting in small incidents that might have seemed random to someone who wasn't paying attention. A misplaced requisition form here, a delayed equipment delivery there, minor discrepancies that created friction without causing major disruptions. But Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. Someone was testing the new coordinator, probing for weaknesses and vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. The testing escalated gradually, moving from administrative inconveniences to more personal challenges. Comments about her qualifications began circulating through unofficial channels. Questions about how a civilian contractor had managed to secure a position that typically required military experience. The whispers followed her through the dining facility, where she ate alone at corner tables, and into the administrative offices where she processed paperwork under the watchful eyes of personnel, who seemed increasingly skeptical of her presence. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres emerged as the unofficial leader of the resistance movement. Torres commanded respect among the junior enlisted personnel, his combat deployment ribbons and confident demeanor marking him as someone whose opinions carried weight in the informal hierarchy that existed alongside official command structures. He had been at Fort Meridian for 2 years, long enough to establish relationships and influence that extended well beyond his official duties. Torres made his feelings about Sarah's appointment clear during a logistics meeting in the third week of her assignment. The discussion had centered around equipment shortages that were affecting training schedules, delays that Sarah had identified as stemming from inefficient procurement processes rather than actual supply limitations. Her analysis was thorough and accurate, backed by data that clearly demonstrated how simple procedural changes could eliminate most of the bottlenecks causing problems. But when Sarah presented her findings to the assembled group of military personnel responsible for training coordination, Torres leaned back in his chair with the kind of skeptical expression that suggested he wasn't impressed by civilian analysis of military problems. His response was measured but pointed, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed his military experience gave him authority that no amount of technical expertise could challenge. The real issue, Torres suggested, wasn't procedural inefficiency, but rather the fundamental problem of having civilian personnel attempting to manage systems they didn't truly understand. Military logistics, he explained to the room, required an appreciation for operational realities that could only come from actual service experience. Charts and data were useful tools, but they couldn't replace the intuitive understanding that came from living and working within military culture. Sarah listened to Torres's criticism without responding immediately, her expression neutral as she processed both his words and the subtle dynamics playing out around the conference table. Several other personnel were nodding in agreement with Torres's assessment, while others seemed more interested in the actual substance of her analysis than in her credentials to provide it. The room was divided, but the division seemed to run deeper than simple disagreement about logistics procedures. When Torres finished his critique, Sarah responded with the kind of calm professionalism that diffused tension without conceding ground. She acknowledged his concerns about civilian oversight of military systems, while pointing out that her recommendations were based on established best practices that had proven successful in similar environments. The specific implementation details could certainly be adjusted to accommodate Fort Meridian's unique requirements, but the underlying inefficiencies she had identified were objectively real and measurably costly. Her response was respectful but firm, demonstrating familiarity with military terminology and procedures that suggested more than superficial knowledge of how such systems operated. But Torres wasn't satisfied with professional courtesy. He wanted acknowledgement that civilian contractors, regardless of their technical qualifications, operated at a fundamental disadvantage when trying to understand military requirements. The confrontation might have remained at the level of professional disagreement, if not for an incident that occurred the following week. Sarah had been working late in her office, reviewing procurement documents that revealed systematic inefficiencies in how specialized training equipment was acquired and distributed. The patterns were complex but clear. Certain types of gear were consistently over-ordered, while other essential items remained chronically short, creating artificial scarcities that complicated training schedules unnecessarily. As she prepared to leave the administrative building, Sarah noticed that the parking lot was unusually quiet for 8:30 in the evening. Most of the staff typically departed by 6, leaving only essential personnel and those working on urgent projects. But tonight, several vehicles remained in the lot, their occupants apparently in no hurry to leave the base. Sarah walked toward her modest sedan, her awareness heightened by subtle signs that suggested she was being observed. The confrontation came as she reached her vehicle. Torres emerged from behind a nearby truck, accompanied by 2 other sergeants whose names Sarah recognized from personnel rosters, but whose faces she knew primarily from brief encounters in administrative settings. Their positioning was deliberate, creating a triangle that effectively blocked her access to the driver's door, while maintaining enough distance to avoid any appearance of direct physical intimidation. Torres spoke first, his voice carrying the kind of controlled authority that suggested this wasn't a spontaneous encounter. He explained that several members of the base personnel had been discussing concerns about security protocols, particularly regarding civilian access to sensitive information and restricted areas. These weren't official complaints, he emphasized, just informal observations from experienced military personnel who took their security responsibilities seriously. Sarah listened without interrupting, recognizing the careful language Torres was using to express hostility while avoiding explicit threats. The message was clear. Her presence was unwelcome, her work was viewed with suspicion, and continued resistance to unofficial pressure might result in more formal challenges to her position. But what interested Sarah most wasn't the content of Torres's message, but rather the way he delivered it. With the confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages in this particular confrontation. When Torres finished speaking, Sarah responded with the same calm professionalism she had displayed during their previous encounters. She thanked him for sharing his concerns and assured him that she took security protocols seriously. If there were specific issues with her work or her access to information, she encouraged him to bring those concerns to the appropriate officials through proper channels. Until then, she would continue performing her assigned duties to the best of her abilities. Torres's expression showed frustration with Sarah's refusal to be intimidated, but he maintained his professional demeanor as the group dispersed. Sarah drove home that evening with the certain knowledge that the informal resistance to her presence had escalated into something more systematic and potentially more dangerous. But she also understood that Torres and his supporters had revealed more about themselves than they probably realized, demonstrating the kind of thinking that prioritized hierarchy and insider status over actual competence. The real test came 2 weeks later when Sarah requested access to the base armory as part of her logistics review. The request was routine from a procedural standpoint, requiring only supervisor approval and basic security verification to allow her to conduct the inventory assessment that was clearly within her job responsibilities. But the response she received suggested that her request had triggered concerns that extended far beyond normal administrative procedures. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the base's senior logistics officer, called Sarah into her office on a Thursday morning with the kind of serious expression that indicated significant problems. Walsh had been supportive of Sarah's work up to this point, appreciating the thoroughness of her analysis and the practical value of her recommendations. But today, Walsh appeared uncomfortable, her usual direct communication style replaced by careful diplomatic language that suggested external pressure. The Armory access request, Walsh explained, had generated unexpected complications. Several department heads had expressed concerns about allowing civilian personnel into secure areas, particularly given the sensitive nature of the equipment stored there. While Walsh personally had no doubts about Sarah's professionalism and competence, she was being asked to reconsider the necessity of civilian access to facilities that were traditionally restricted to military personnel only. Sarah recognized the delicate position Walsh was in, caught between supporting her civilian contractor and responding to pressure from other officers who clearly had reservations about Sarah's expanding role in base operations. But Sarah also understood that the Armory inventory was essential to completing her logistics assessment, and that conducting a thorough review without examining actual equipment stocks would compromise the accuracy of her findings. She explained to Walsh that the inventory was necessary to verify the discrepancies she had identified in procurement records, discrepancies that suggested either systematic inefficiencies or potentially more serious problems with equipment tracking. Without physical verification of what was actually in storage, her recommendations would be based on incomplete information that might not reflect the true scope of the logistics challenges facing the base. Walsh listened carefully to Sarah's explanation, clearly weighing the professional necessity of the Armory access against the political complications that such access might create. After several minutes of consideration, Walsh made a decision that satisfied no one, while avoiding direct confrontation with either side of the issue. Sarah would be granted limited access to the Armory, but only under direct supervision and only for the specific purpose of conducting inventory verification. The compromise felt like a partial victory, but Sarah understood that it also represented an acknowledgement that her presence at the base had become a political issue that extended beyond simple questions of professional competence. Someone had been working behind the scenes to limit her access and undermine her effectiveness, using concerns about security and civilian oversight as justification for restrictions that had little to do with actual security requirements. The Armory visit was scheduled for the following Monday morning, with Master Sergeant Daniel Rodriguez assigned to provide supervision and ensure that security protocols were followed strictly. Rodriguez was a career military professional with 22 years of service, someone whose experience and judgment were respected throughout the base. His assignment to supervise Sarah's Armory access suggested that Walsh was taking the concerns of her colleagues seriously while ensuring that the inventory could proceed as planned. Sarah arrived at the Armory facility at exactly 0800 hours, carrying the documentation required for her inventory assessment and prepared for what might prove to be a challenging morning. The Armory building was a fortress-like structure constructed of reinforced concrete and steel, its exterior designed to withstand both natural disasters and potential security threats. Access was controlled through multiple checkpoints, each requiring different levels of authorization and verification. Rodriguez met her at the main entrance, his manner professional but noticeably reserved. He explained the security procedures that would govern her access, emphasizing that all personnel entering the Armory were required to follow strict protocols designed to protect both the equipment and the people working with it. Sarah would be escorted at all times, her activities would be limited to observation and documentation, and any questions about specific equipment would be directed to Rodriguez for appropriate responses. The restrictions were more extensive than Sarah had expected, effectively limiting her ability to conduct the kind of thorough assessment that would provide meaningful results. But she accepted the limitations without complaint, understanding that Rodriguez was implementing policies designed to address concerns that had been raised by others, rather than reflecting his own professional judgment about her qualifications or trustworthiness. The interior of the Armory revealed organizational systems that were both impressive and problematic. Weapons were stored with military precision, each item properly secured and documented according to regulations that prioritize security over accessibility. But Sarah's trained eye immediately identified inefficiencies that were costing time and resources while potentially compromising the readiness that the system was designed to ensure. Inventory records showed significant discrepancies between what was supposed to be in storage and what was actually available for training exercises. Some categories of equipment were severely overstocked, while others showed chronic shortages that forced training units to modify their exercises or postpone them entirely. The patterns were complex but clear to someone with the right background to interpret them. The base was spending too much money on equipment it didn't need while failing to maintain adequate supplies of items that were essential for effective training. But what caught Sarah's attention most wasn't the inventory discrepancies or even the inefficient storage systems. It was the way Rodriguez moved through the facility, with the careful awareness of someone who understood that armories were potentially dangerous places where small mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. His movements were economical and purposeful, his attention constantly scanning for potential hazards or security risks that might not be obvious to less experienced personnel. Sarah found herself matching Rodriguez's pace and awareness automatically, her own movements displaying the same kind of systematic caution that suggested familiarity with environments where vigilance was essential for survival. She noticed details that civilian logistics coordinators typically wouldn't: the way certain weapons were positioned for rapid access, the locations of emergency equipment, the sight lines that provided optimal observation of potential threats. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Her questions about inventory procedures revealed understanding of military protocols that extended far beyond what her official background should have provided. Rodriguez noticed these details as well, his initial reserve gradually giving way to professional curiosity about the woman he was supervising. Sarah's questions were too specific, and her observations too accurate to reflect only civilian logistics experience. She moved through the armory with confidence that suggested prior familiarity with similar environments, and her comments about equipment revealed knowledge that typically required specialized military training to acquire. The morning progressed with Sarah documenting inventory discrepancies, while Rodriguez provided explanations for the various systems and procedures that governed armory operations. But both of them were aware that a different kind of assessment was taking place, one that had less to do with supply chain efficiency and more to do with recognizing competence and experience that might not be reflected in official records. The defining moment came when Sarah noticed a problem that Rodriguez had missed, a safety issue that could have serious consequences if not addressed promptly. One of the weapon storage racks showed signs of structural stress that suggested potential failure under load, a condition that could result in damaged equipment or injured personnel if weapons were stored or retrieved carelessly. The problem wasn't immediately obvious, requiring the kind of detailed observation that came from understanding how mechanical systems failed under stress. Sarah pointed out the issue to Rodriguez, explaining the specific indicators that suggested structural compromise and recommending immediate inspection by qualified maintenance personnel. Her analysis was precise and accurate, demonstrating familiarity with metallurgy and stress analysis that went far beyond anything a civilian logistics coordinator would typically possess. Rodriguez examined the rack more carefully, confirming that Sarah had identified a legitimate safety concern that had escaped his notice despite his years of experience working in armory environments. The discovery created an awkward moment for both of them. Rodriguez was embarrassed that he had missed a potential safety hazard in a facility under his supervision, while Sarah realized that her technical analysis had revealed more about her background than she had intended to disclose. But Rodriguez was also impressed by the quality of Sarah's observation, recognizing that her ability to identify the structural problem indicated training and experience that wasn't reflected in her official position. As they completed the inventory assessment, Rodriguez found himself reassessing his assumptions about the civilian contractor he had been assigned to supervise. Sarah's questions were too sophisticated, and her observations too accurate to reflect only academic knowledge of military logistics. She demonstrated familiarity with weapons systems, security protocols, and operational procedures that suggested a background in military service, despite her official status as a civilian contractor. But Rodriguez was also a professional who understood the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries between personal curiosity and official responsibilities. If Sarah Chen had military experience that wasn't reflected in her personnel file, that was information for higher authorities to address through appropriate channels. His job was to ensure that she completed her inventory assessment safely and in accordance with security protocols, not to investigate discrepancies between her apparent qualifications and her official background. The armory visit concluded without incident, but it had generated new questions about Sarah's background that would prove difficult to ignore. Rodriguez filed his routine report on the supervised access, noting that the civilian contractor had completed her assigned tasks professionally and had identified a safety concern that required immediate attention. But he also mentioned, in carefully neutral language, that Ms. Chen had demonstrated familiarity with military equipment and procedures that seemed inconsistent with her official qualifications. Sarah returned to her office that afternoon knowing that the Armory visit had accomplished its intended purpose while potentially creating new complications for her position at Fort Meridian. The inventory discrepancies she had documented were significant enough to justify comprehensive reforms in procurement and storage procedures, reforms that could save substantial amounts of money while improving training effectiveness. But her technical observations during the visit had revealed more about her background than was consistent with maintaining her cover as a simple civilian contractor. That evening, as Sarah reviewed the documentation from her Armory assessment, she reflected on the delicate balance she had been trying to maintain since arriving at Fort Meridian. Her mission required her to operate effectively within military systems while avoiding the kind of attention that might compromise her ability to complete her actual assignment. But effective operation required demonstrating competence that was difficult to reconcile with her official civilian status. The Armory visit had pushed that balance to its breaking point. Rodriguez was too experienced and too observant to ignore the inconsistencies between Sarah's apparent qualifications and her official background. His report would generate questions that might prove difficult to answer through conventional channels, questions that could lead to investigations that would reveal information she wasn't authorized to disclose. But Sarah also understood that her work at Fort Meridian was too important to compromise through excessive caution. The logistics inefficiencies she had identified weren't just administrative problems, they were operational vulnerabilities that could affect the readiness and effectiveness of critical training programs. Fixing those problems required her to demonstrate competence that inevitably revealed her actual qualifications, even if those qualifications couldn't be officially acknowledged. As she prepared her preliminary report on the Armory inventory, Sarah made a decision that would prove to have far-reaching consequences. She would present her findings with complete professional honesty, documenting the problems she had identified and recommending solutions based on her actual expertise rather than limiting herself to observations that were consistent with her official background. The truth about her qualifications would have to be addressed through appropriate channels, but the mission came first. The report she submitted the following morning was comprehensive, detailed, and professionally devastating in its analysis of the base's logistics systems. Sarah documented systematic inefficiencies that were costing hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, while compromising training effectiveness. Her recommendations for reform were specific, practical, and based on understanding of military operations that clearly exceeded what any civilian contractor should possess. But the report also raised immediate questions about how a logistics coordinator had acquired the expertise necessary to conduct such sophisticated analysis. Sarah's technical observations about equipment performance, her insights into operational requirements, and her understanding of military procurement procedures all suggested training and experience that wasn't reflected in her official personnel file. Captain Walsh read the report with growing amazement and concern. The quality of the analysis was exceptional, identifying problems that had persisted for years while proposing solutions that were both innovative and practical. But the level of expertise demonstrated in the report was difficult to reconcile with Sarah's official background as a civilian contractor with logistics experience in the private sector. Walsh found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to decide whether to forward the report through official channels, knowing that it would generate questions about how a civilian contractor had acquired the qualifications necessary to produce such sophisticated analysis. The report's recommendations could significantly improve base operations, but implementing them would require acknowledging that the contractor who produced them possessed expertise that couldn't be easily explained through conventional means. The decision was made for Walsh when Colonel Patricia Morrison, the base commander, requested a meeting to discuss the preliminary findings from the logistics assessment. Morrison had been briefed on Sarah's work and was interested in understanding the scope of the problems that had been identified. But Morrison was also aware that the contractor conducting the assessment had generated some controversy among her staff, controversy that needed to be addressed before any major reforms were implemented. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning in Morrison's office, with Walsh, Rodriguez, and Torres all invited to participate in the discussion. Sarah was not initially included in the meeting, but Morrison requested her presence after reviewing the preliminary report and recognizing that meaningful discussion of the findings would require input from the person who had conducted the analysis. Sarah arrived at the meeting, prepared for questions that might prove difficult to answer honestly while maintaining her cover. The assembled officers represented different perspectives on her work and her presence at the base, from Walsh's professional support to Torres's continued skepticism about civilian oversight of military systems. Morrison's opinion would ultimately determine whether Sarah's recommendations were implemented and whether her position at the base remained secure. Morrison opened the meeting by acknowledging that the logistics assessment had identified significant problems that required immediate attention. The cost savings potential alone justified serious consideration of the proposed reforms, and the operational improvements could enhance training effectiveness across multiple programs. But Morrison was also concerned about the source of the analysis, particularly given the questions that had been raised about the contractor's qualifications and background. Rodriguez presented his observations from the Armory visit, carefully documenting Sarah's professional competence while noting the technical expertise she had demonstrated. His report was factual and objective, but it clearly indicated that Sarah possessed knowledge and skills that seemed inconsistent with her official civilian status. The safety issue she had identified had been confirmed by maintenance personnel, demonstrating that her technical analysis was both accurate and valuable. Torres used the opportunity to renew his concerns about civilian access to sensitive facilities and information. While he acknowledged that Sarah's work had produced useful results, he argued that the potential security risks of civilian involvement in military operations outweighed any administrative benefits that might be achieved. Military logistics, in his view, required military solutions implemented by military personnel with appropriate clearances and experience. Walsh defended Sarah's work while acknowledging the questions that had been raised about her background. The quality of the analysis was exceptional, and the recommendations were based on established best practices that could significantly improve base operations. If there were concerns about security or qualifications, those issues should be addressed through appropriate channels rather than used to dismiss analysis that was clearly valuable and professionally competent. Morrison listened to all perspectives before addressing the central question that had brought them together. The logistics problems were real and costly, requiring solutions that would improve both efficiency and effectiveness. Sarah's analysis had identified those problems accurately while proposing practical reforms that could be implemented with existing resources. But the questions about her qualifications needed to be resolved before any major changes were approved. Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. Rather than conducting a formal investigation into Sarah's background or limiting her access to address security concerns, Morrison authorized her to proceed with implementing her recommendations on a trial basis. The pilot program would allow the base to evaluate the effectiveness of the proposed reforms while maintaining oversight that addressed the concerns that had been raised. But Morrison also made it clear that the pilot program was contingent on complete transparency about qualifications and experience. If Sarah possessed military experience or specialized training that wasn't reflected in her official file, that information needed to be disclosed through appropriate channels. The base couldn't afford to operate with personnel whose backgrounds weren't fully understood and properly documented. Sarah found herself facing the moment she had been working to avoid since arriving at Fort Meridian. The mission required her to maintain her civilian cover while demonstrating competence that was difficult to reconcile with that cover. But Morrison's directive made it clear that continued effectiveness required disclosure of information that could compromise her ability to operate in similar environments in the future. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her office to consider her options. The pilot program offered an opportunity to implement reforms that could significantly improve base operations. But accepting the assignment would require revealing information about her background that was classified beyond the clearance levels of most base personnel. The compromise her cover identity while potentially advancing operational objectives that were consistent with her actual mission. That evening, Sarah made a secure phone call to her handler, requesting guidance on how to proceed with the situation that had developed at Fort Meridian. The conversation was brief and cryptic, but the message was clear. Operational objectives took priority over cover maintenance, and Sarah was authorized to take whatever steps were necessary to complete her mission successfully. The following Monday morning, Sarah requested a private meeting with Colonel Morrison to discuss the background verification that had been requested. She arrived at Morrison's office carrying a sealed envelope that contained documentation she wasn't supposed to possess as a civilian contractor. Documentation that would answer the questions that had been raised about her qualifications, while potentially creating new questions about the nature of her assignment at Fort Meridian. Morrison opened the envelope and examined the contents with growing amazement. The documentation included military service records, specialized training certifications, and clearance authorizations that clearly explained Sarah's technical expertise, while raising immediate questions about why someone with such qualifications was working as a civilian contractor. The records showed combat deployments, advanced technical training, and security clearances that exceeded those held by most base personnel. But what caught Morrison's attention most was a small item that had been included with the documentation, a worn green beret that showed signs of extensive use in challenging environments. The beret was accompanied by a citation for exceptional service in classified operations that had required exactly the kind of technical expertise Sarah had been demonstrating in her logistics work at Fort Meridian. Morrison looked up from the documentation to study Sarah with new understanding. The quiet competence, the technical expertise, the familiarity with military protocols, all suddenly made perfect sense when viewed in the context of the career record that had just been revealed. Sarah wasn't a civilian contractor who happened to have unusual qualifications. She was a highly trained military professional, operating under deep cover for reasons that were above Morrison's clearance level. The revelation explained everything while raising new questions that Morrison wasn't authorized to pursue. Sarah's presence at Fort Meridian wasn't a random assignment or a result of bureaucratic efficiency. It was part of an operation that required someone with her specific qualifications and experience. The logistics assessment was real and valuable, but it was also cover for activities that extended beyond simple administrative reform. Morrison made a decision that demonstrated the kind of professional judgment that had earned her command responsibilities. Rather than asking questions that she wasn't authorized to have answered, Morrison focused on the practical implications of what had been revealed. Sarah's qualifications were clearly adequate for any assignment the base might require, and her work had already demonstrated value that justified continued support. The green beret was returned to Sarah with the kind of respect that military professionals reserve for recognition of exceptional service under challenging conditions. Morrison's acknowledgement was simple and direct. Sarah's background explained her competence, and her competence had earned the base's full support for whatever assignment she needed to complete. The conversation was brief and professional, but it marked a fundamental shift in Sarah's status at Fort Meridian. The pretense of civilian contractor status was no longer necessary, replaced by recognition of her actual qualifications and authorization to operate with whatever access and resources her mission required. The questions about security and civilian oversight had been resolved through disclosure of information that made such concerns irrelevant. Torres received the news of Sarah's revealed background with a mixture of embarrassment and professional respect. His concerns about civilian access and qualifications had been addressed in a way that demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of what he had been dealing with. Sarah wasn't a civilian trying to understand military systems. She was a military professional operating undercover that had been maintained to serve operational requirements rather than to deceive base personnel. Rodriguez's reaction was professional satisfaction at having his instincts confirmed. Sarah's technical expertise and familiarity with military protocols had indicated training and experience that civilian contractors rarely possessed. The revelation of her actual background explained the inconsistencies he had observed while validating his assessment of her professional competence. Walsh expressed relief that the questions about Sarah's qualifications had been resolved in a way that allowed her logistics reforms to proceed without political complications. The pilot program could now move forward with full confidence that the person implementing the changes possessed both the technical expertise and the operational understanding necessary for success. The transformation of Sarah's status at Fort Meridian was complete but subtle. Her work continued with the same professional focus, but the restrictions and oversight that had limited her effectiveness were quietly removed. Access to secure facilities became routine rather than exceptional, and her recommendations were implemented with the confidence that came from recognizing her actual qualifications. The logistics reforms proved even more successful than her analysis had predicted. Equipment shortages that had persisted for months were resolved through improved procurement procedures. Training schedules became more efficient and effective through better resource allocation. Cost savings exceeded projections while operational readiness improved measurably across all training programs. But Sarah understood that her mission at Fort Meridian was entering a new phase. The cover identity that had protected her while she conducted her assessment was no longer necessary, but the operational objectives that had brought her to the base remained unchanged. The logistics improvements were real and valuable, but they were also foundation for activities that extended beyond simple administrative reform. 6 months after the revelation of her background, Sarah stood in the Armory facility where her true qualifications had first been questioned, now working with full access and complete support from base personnel. The inventory discrepancies that had brought her there had been resolved, replaced by systems that provided accurate tracking and efficient distribution of critical training resources. The green beret that had spent years hidden in a sealed envelope now rested in a place of honor in her quarters, a reminder of service that had taken many forms but had never truly ended. The mission continued, adapted to new environments and requirements but maintaining the same essential purpose, ensuring that those who served their country had the resources and support they needed to succeed. Rodriguez approached her workstation that afternoon with the kind of professional respect that reflected their evolved relationship. The structural problem she had identified during her supervised visit had been repaired, and the safety improvements she had recommended had been implemented throughout the facility. Her technical expertise was now recognized and utilized without question or restriction. The conversation was brief and professional, but it represented the complete transformation of attitudes that had once questioned her presence and qualifications. Sarah Chen was no longer an outsider trying to understand military systems. She was a recognized expert whose contributions were valued and whose presence was essential to the base's continued improvement. As Rodriguez left, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from suspicious civilian contractor to recognized military professional. The hostility and resistance she had faced weren't unusual. They were natural responses to change and uncertainty that had been resolved through demonstration of competence and disclosure of truth. The Armory hummed with quiet efficiency around her, its systems operating with the precision that reflected proper maintenance and expert oversight. The equipment was ready, the personnel were prepared, and the mission continued with the support of professionals who understood the importance of technical excellence and operational success. Sarah's transformation was complete, but her work was just beginning. The green beret had been found, her qualifications had been recognized, and her mission could proceed with the full support and resources that success required. The foundation had been established for operations that would extend far beyond Fort Meridian, operations that would benefit from the expertise and dedication of someone who had never stopped serving, even when that service had required her to remain hidden in plain sight. The story of Sarah Chen at Fort Meridian was proof that competence could overcome prejudice, that truth could resolve misunderstanding, and that the right person in the right place could transform not just operations, but entire organizational cultures. Her green beret had been more than a symbol. It had been evidence of qualifications that enabled her to serve in ways that made a difference. In the end, the simple woman who had been denied access to the Armory had proven to be anything but simple. She was a professional whose skills and experience had been earned through service in some of the most demanding environments the military could provide. Her presence at Fort Meridian hadn't been an accident or an administrative error. It had been a carefully planned assignment that required exactly the qualifications she possessed. The transformation was complete, the mission was proceeding, and the work continued with the recognition and support that enabled excellence to flourish. Sometimes the most important contributions came from those who worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring that when critical moments arrived, everything functioned exactly as intended. Sarah Chen had found her place in that tradition, serving with distinction, while maintaining the standards that made success possible. The green beret had been found, and with it the recognition of service that had never truly ended, only adapted to new forms and new requirements. The mission continued, supported by professionals who understood that excellence required dedication, competence, and the courage to serve wherever service was needed most. The transformation of Sarah's operational status at Fort Meridian created ripple effects that extended far beyond the base's administrative corridors. Word of her revealed background traveled through military channels with the kind of velocity that accompanied information deemed both significant and sensitive. Within 72 hours of Colonel Morrison's discovery, inquiries began arriving from headquarters units that rarely concerned themselves with routine personnel assignments at training facilities. Major General Elizabeth Hawkins received the first briefing about Sarah Chen on a Tuesday morning in her Pentagon office, delivered by an aide whose expressions suggested the information carried implications that extended beyond routine personnel matters. Hawkins had spent 30 years navigating the complex intersection of military operations and political oversight, developing instincts that recognized when seemingly isolated incidents indicated larger operational patterns. The briefing materials included Sarah's complete service record, documentation that revealed a career progression through some of the military's most demanding assignments. Her technical expertise had been developed through specialized schools that produced graduates capable of supporting operations in environments where equipment failure meant mission failure and potentially catastrophic consequences for American personnel and interests. But what captured Hawkins's attention wasn't Sarah's individual qualifications, impressive though they were. It was the pattern of assignments that had brought her to Fort Meridian, a pattern that suggested coordination between agencies that typically operated independently. Sarah's placement at the training facility hadn't been random administrative efficiency. It had been part of a larger operation that required someone with her specific capabilities and security clearances. Hawkins made a secure phone call to Brigadier General Marcus Thompson, her counterpart in the Special Operations Command, who coordinated activities that rarely appeared in official reports. Thompson's response was immediate and unambiguous. Sarah Chen's assignment was part of an ongoing operation that had strategic implications extending well beyond equipment logistics at a single training facility. The conversation was brief and cryptic, but it provided Hawkins with enough context to understand that Sarah's work at Fort Meridian was both more important and more sensitive than it appeared. The logistics improvements were real and valuable, but they were also foundation for activities that supported national security objectives requiring the highest levels of operational security and professional competence. Meanwhile, at Fort Meridian, Sarah found herself operating with access and authority that reflected her actual qualifications rather than her former cover identity. The transformation was subtle but profound, affecting everything from routine interactions with base personnel to the scope and complexity of assignments she was asked to undertake. Her workspace evolved from a simple administrative office into something resembling a specialized technical laboratory equipped with tools and systems that supported operations far beyond routine logistics coordination. The change was most apparent in the quality of problems that began appearing on her desk. Equipment malfunctions that had puzzled base maintenance personnel for months were resolved through analysis that identified root causes and implemented solutions extending far beyond simple repairs. Training scenarios that had been limited by resource constraints were enhanced through innovations that maximized effectiveness while minimizing costs. Captain David Park, the base's intelligence officer, began including Sarah in briefings that addressed security concerns extending beyond Fort Meridian's immediate operational requirements. Park had been watching the evolution of Sarah's role with professional interest, recognizing that her technical expertise provided capabilities that enhanced the base's ability to support missions requiring specialized equipment preparation and maintenance. The first major test of Sarah's expanded role came when Park approached her with a problem that had been frustrating intelligence analysts for several weeks. Foreign intelligence services had been developing countermeasures to American military equipment, countermeasures that suggested access to technical specifications that should have been classified above their clearance levels. The security breach implications were serious enough to warrant investigation by agencies with resources extending far beyond what Fort Meridian could provide. But Park's immediate concern wasn't the source of the security breach. It was the practical problem of ensuring that American equipment remained effective despite foreign knowledge of its technical characteristics. The solution required modifications that enhanced performance while changing operational signatures enough to defeat countermeasures based on previous specifications. Sarah examined the intelligence materials with the kind of systematic attention that reflected training in threat assessment and countermeasure development. The foreign countermeasures were sophisticated and well-informed, indicating access to technical documentation that revealed not just equipment specifications but also tactical employment methods used by American forces in operational environments. Her analysis identified vulnerabilities that extended beyond simple technical compromises to include operational patterns that made American forces predictable to adversaries with access to the right intelligence. The countermeasures weren't just technical, they were tactical, designed to exploit American operational preferences and equipment limitations in ways that could prove catastrophic in actual combat environments. Sarah's recommendations went far beyond simple equipment modifications to include comprehensive changes in operational procedures, training protocols, and equipment employment methods. The scope of her analysis impressed Park, while simultaneously raising questions about how a logistics coordinator, even one with revealed military background, had acquired expertise in areas that typically required specialized intelligence training. Park found himself in the delicate position of needing to utilize Sarah's analysis while managing questions about the source of expertise that enabled such sophisticated assessment of intelligence materials. Her recommendations were clearly valuable and professionally competent, but they also demonstrated knowledge of intelligence operations that suggested training beyond what her official record indicated. The resolution came when Park received instructions from higher headquarters authorizing him to utilize Sarah's expertise without questioning the source of her qualifications. The directive was clear and unambiguous. Sarah Chen was authorized to access whatever information and resources were necessary to support her assigned missions, regardless of normal security protocols that might otherwise limit civilian contractor access to sensitive materials. Park understood that the authorization indicated coordination at levels far above his position in the command hierarchy. Sarah wasn't just a technically competent contractor who happened to have unusual qualifications. She was an asset whose capabilities were being directed by authorities, with perspectives extending far beyond Fort Meridian's immediate operational requirements. The implementation of Sarah's countermeasure recommendations began immediately, but the process revealed additional complications that required coordination extending across multiple military services and civilian agencies. The equipment modifications were technically challenging but achievable. The operational changes required retraining personnel and modifying procedures that had been standard practice for years. Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, the base's operations officer, found himself coordinating changes that affected every aspect of training and equipment preparation. Rodriguez had been initially skeptical of modifications recommended by a civilian contractor, but Sarah's revealed background and the authorization she had received eliminated any questions about her qualifications to propose such comprehensive reforms. The training modifications proved more complex than the technical changes, requiring coordination with schools and units that provided specialized instruction to military personnel. Sarah's recommendations affected everything from basic equipment handling procedures to advanced tactical employment methods, changes that needed to be implemented consistently across all units that might encounter foreign countermeasures in operational environments. Rodriguez discovered that implementing Sarah's recommendations required him to work with agencies and organizations that rarely coordinated directly with training facilities. The scope of the changes indicated that Fort Meridian was being used as a testing ground for innovations that would eventually be implemented throughout the military. Innovations that originated from intelligence analysis conducted by someone whose qualifications extended far beyond what her official position suggested. The first indication that Sarah's work was attracting attention from outside Fort Meridian came when Colonel Morrison received a visit from officials whose credentials indicated involvement in operations that didn't appear on organizational charts. The visitors were professional and courteous, but their questions about Sarah's work and her access to base facilities suggested oversight responsibilities that extended well beyond normal command channels. Morrison provided the requested information while carefully avoiding speculation about aspects of Sarah's assignment that weren't within her need to know. The visitors seemed satisfied with Morrison's responses, but their presence indicated that Sarah's activities were being monitored by authorities with interests extending far beyond routine personnel management or logistics improvement. The visit was followed by additional inquiries from organizations that Morrison recognized as being involved in operations requiring the highest levels of security and operational competence. The pattern suggested that Sarah's work at Fort Meridian was part of a larger operation that required coordination between agencies that typically operated independently, coordination that indicated strategic importance extending well beyond training facility management. Sarah became aware of the increased attention through subtle changes in how her work was supported and coordinated. Resources that had previously required complex approval processes became available through simplified procedures that bypassed normal administrative channels. Technical equipment that wasn't typically available to base personnel appeared in her workspace without formal requisition or procurement processes. The changes were convenient and professionally satisfying, but they also indicated that her mission at Fort Meridian was entering a new phase that required capabilities extending beyond what she had been authorized to utilize during her initial assignment. The logistics work remained important, but it was being supplemented by activities that addressed security concerns and operational requirements extending far beyond Fort Meridian's immediate responsibilities. The expansion of Sarah's role became apparent when she was asked to evaluate equipment that wasn't part of Fort Meridian's normal inventory. The items were technically sophisticated and clearly expensive, representing technologies that were either experimental or classified above normal security levels. Her assessment was requested not for procurement or maintenance purposes, but for operational evaluation that would determine how such equipment might be employed in environments where American forces faced adversaries with access to countermeasures based on intelligence compromises. Sarah's evaluation revealed both capabilities and vulnerabilities that had implications extending well beyond Fort Meridian's training programs. The equipment was technically impressive but operationally limited in ways that could prove catastrophic if not properly understood by personnel employing it in actual combat environments. Her recommendations included modifications that would enhance performance while reducing vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries with access to technical intelligence. But Sarah's analysis also identified opportunities for innovations that could provide significant advantages in operational environments, where equipment performance was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The innovations required technical expertise and operational understanding that combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience in environments where failure wasn't survivable. The scope of Sarah's recommendations impressed the officials who had requested her evaluation while simultaneously raising questions about the source of expertise that enabled such sophisticated analysis. Her technical knowledge was clearly extensive and her operational understanding was obviously based on actual experience. But the combination suggested training and assignments that extended beyond what appeared in her official record. The questions were resolved when Sarah received authorization to reveal additional aspects of her background to officials with appropriate clearances and need to know. The disclosure process was carefully controlled and limited to information necessary for understanding her qualifications, but it provided enough context to explain the source of expertise that enabled her current assignments. The revealed information indicated that Sarah's career had included assignments that officially didn't exist, operations that required the highest levels of technical competence and operational security. Her expertise had been developed through training programs that produced graduates capable of supporting activities in environments where exposure meant death, and equipment failure meant mission failure with strategic consequences. Major General Hawkins received the additional background information with professional satisfaction and strategic concern. Sarah's qualifications clearly justified the confidence that had been placed in her abilities, but her assignment to Fort Meridian indicated operational requirements that extended far beyond routine training facility management. The pattern suggested that American forces were facing threats that required countermeasures developed by personnel, with Sarah's unique combination of technical expertise and operational experience. The strategic implications became clear when Hawkins received intelligence indicating that foreign adversaries had been developing capabilities specifically designed to exploit American equipment and operational procedures. The countermeasures weren't random technical innovations. They were systematic efforts to neutralize American advantages through intelligence collection and analysis that revealed vulnerabilities in equipment and tactics that had been considered secure. Sarah's work at Fort Meridian wasn't just logistics improvement or routine security enhancement. It was part of a comprehensive response to threats that could fundamentally alter the balance of capabilities between American forces and their adversaries. Her innovations and countermeasures were being developed and tested at Fort Meridian for eventual implementation throughout the military. Implementation that would restore American advantages while denying adversaries the ability to exploit intelligence they had acquired through compromises of American security. The realization transformed how Hawkins viewed Sarah's assignment and the resources that needed to be provided to support her work. Fort Meridian was no longer just a training facility. It was a development center for innovations that would determine American military effectiveness in environments where adversaries possessed intelligence that eliminated traditional advantages. The expansion of resources available to Sarah became apparent when her workspace was transformed into something resembling an advanced research laboratory equipped with technical systems that weren't available through normal procurement channels. The equipment represented cutting-edge technology that enabled analysis and development work requiring capabilities that extended far beyond what routine logistics coordination would require. But the most significant change wasn't the technical resources. It was the personnel who began arriving at Fort Meridian to support Sarah's expanded mission. The new arrivals were technically competent and professionally experienced, but their backgrounds indicated involvement in operations that required security clearances and operational experience extending well beyond normal military assignments. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a civilian technical specialist with credentials indicating involvement in classified research programs, arrived at Fort Meridian with authorization to support Sarah's equipment analysis and modification work. Walsh's expertise complemented Sarah's operational experience, providing theoretical knowledge that enhanced practical innovations while ensuring that modifications maintained reliability under operational stress. Master Sergeant Kevin Thompson, whose service record indicated assignments that officially didn't exist, joined Sarah's team with responsibility for coordinating testing and evaluation of modified equipment. Thompson's experience provided operational perspective that ensured innovations were practical and effective rather than merely technically sophisticated. The team that assembled around Sarah represented capabilities that individual bases rarely possessed, capabilities that indicated coordination and resource allocation from authorities with strategic perspectives extending far beyond routine military operations. The team's mission wasn't just equipment improvement. It was the development of comprehensive responses to threats that could determine American military effectiveness in future conflicts. Sarah found herself leading a team whose collective expertise enabled innovations that addressed security vulnerabilities while providing new capabilities for American forces operating in environments where adversaries possessed intelligence that eliminated traditional advantages. The work was technically challenging and strategically important, requiring coordination with agencies and organizations that rarely work directly with training facilities. The first major success came when Sarah's team developed modifications to communications equipment that defeated foreign countermeasures while providing enhanced capabilities for American forces. The innovations were technically sophisticated but operationally practical, enabling secure communications in environments where foreign intelligence services had previously been able to intercept and analyze American tactical communications. The success attracted attention from commands that coordinated operations requiring the highest levels of security and technical competence. Sarah's team was asked to evaluate additional equipment and develop countermeasures for threats that extended beyond Fort Meridian's immediate operational environment to include global operations where American forces faced adversaries with sophisticated intelligence capabilities. Colonel Morrison found herself coordinating with organizations that rarely interacted directly with training facilities, organizations whose involvement indicated that Fort Meridian was becoming a center for activities that extended far beyond routine training and logistics support. The transformation was professionally satisfying but also strategically significant, indicating that the base was contributing to national security in ways that extended far beyond its original mission. The change was most apparent in the security protocols that were implemented to protect Sarah's work and the personnel supporting her expanded mission. Access controls that had been adequate for training facility management were replaced by systems that addressed the security requirements of operations involving classified technologies and strategic intelligence materials. But the transformation also created challenges that required careful management to maintain operational security, while enabling the coordination necessary for mission success. Sarah's team needed to work with organizations and agencies that operated under different security protocols while maintaining the compartmentation necessary to protect sensitive operations from exposure to unauthorized personnel. The solution required coordination between security officials who rarely worked together directly, coordination that established protocols enabling necessary cooperation while maintaining the security boundaries essential for protecting classified operations. The process was complex and time-consuming, but it enabled Sarah's team to access resources and expertise that significantly enhanced their ability to develop effective countermeasures. The expanded mission also required Sarah to travel to facilities that supported operations she had been involved with during her previous assignments, operations that had provided the operational experience that enabled her current work. The travel was carefully coordinated and security was maintained throughout, but it enabled direct cooperation with personnel who possessed complementary expertise and operational experience. The coordination revealed that Sarah's assignment to Fort Meridian was part of a comprehensive response to intelligence compromises that threatened American military effectiveness in multiple operational environments. Her work was being supplemented by similar efforts at other facilities, efforts that collectively addressed vulnerabilities that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. Major General Hawkins coordinated the overall response from her Pentagon office, managing resources and personnel assignments that enabled comprehensive countermeasure development while maintaining the operational security necessary to protect American capabilities from further compromise. The coordination was complex and strategically important, requiring cooperation between organizations that typically operated independently. The success of Sarah's team at Fort Meridian provided proof that the comprehensive approach was effective, demonstrating that American forces could maintain their advantages despite intelligence compromises that had threatened to neutralize traditional capabilities. The innovations developed at Fort Meridian were being implemented throughout the military, providing enhanced security and improved performance that restored American advantages while denying adversaries the ability to exploit intelligence they had acquired. Sarah's transformation from logistics coordinator to team leader for strategic countermeasure development represented the successful adaptation of operational requirements to address threats that hadn't existed when traditional military structures were established. Her success demonstrated that innovative approaches to personnel utilization and resource allocation could provide capabilities that addressed emerging threats while maintaining the security and effectiveness that American forces required for mission success. The work continued with enhanced resources and expanded authority, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged, ensuring that American forces possessed the equipment and capabilities necessary for success in operational environments where adversaries possessed intelligence that could neutralize traditional advantages. Sarah's team was providing solutions that restored American superiority while adapting to threats that required innovative responses. The green beret that had revealed Sarah's true qualifications now served as a symbol of service that had adapted to new requirements while maintaining the standards and commitment that defined military excellence. Her journey from questioned contractor to strategic asset demonstrated that competence could overcome initial resistance, while innovation could address threats that challenged traditional approaches to military operations. Fort Meridian had been transformed from a routine training facility into a center for strategic innovation, but the transformation had been accomplished through the recognition and utilization of expertise that had always been present, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal its true value. Sarah's success proved that excellence could flourish when provided with appropriate resources and authority, creating capabilities that enhanced American security while maintaining the operational effectiveness that successful military operations required. The morning briefing in the Pentagon's secure conference room carried an urgency that Admiral Susan Mitchell had rarely encountered in her 35 years of naval service. The intelligence materials spread across the polished table represented what analysts were calling the most significant security challenge facing American military operations since the end of the Cold War. Foreign adversaries had not only penetrated American security systems, but had begun deploying countermeasures that specifically targeted equipment and tactics that formed the foundation of American military superiority. Admiral Mitchell studied the briefing materials with the systematic attention that had made her one of the most respected intelligence officers in the Defense Department. The pattern of compromises wasn't random or opportunistic. It represented a coordinated campaign designed to neutralize American advantages while providing foreign forces with capabilities that could fundamentally alter the global balance of military power. The most disturbing aspect of the intelligence wasn't the scope of the compromises but the sophistication of the countermeasures that had been developed using stolen American technical specifications. Foreign forces were fielding equipment that could defeat American systems by exploiting vulnerabilities that should have remained classified indefinitely. The implications extended far beyond tactical disadvantages to include strategic vulnerabilities that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. General Patricia Hawkins presented the first assessment of countermeasure development efforts that had been initiated at facilities across the United States. The programs were showing promising results, but the timeline for comprehensive deployment remained uncertain, while foreign adversaries continued developing additional capabilities based on ongoing intelligence collection efforts. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source: a training facility in California where a logistics coordinator had been conducting routine equipment assessments. The coordinator's analysis had identified vulnerabilities that traditional security reviews had missed, while proposing innovations that could restore American advantages, even in environments where adversaries possessed detailed intelligence about American capabilities. Fort Meridian had become the center for countermeasure development because of work conducted by a team led by someone whose qualifications had been initially questioned by base personnel. Sarah Chen's transition from suspected security risk to strategic asset represented the kind of personnel utilization that enabled innovative solutions to threats that challenged conventional approaches to military operations. Admiral Mitchell recognized that the Fort Meridian program represented more than successful countermeasure development. It demonstrated that American forces could adapt to threats that required capabilities extending beyond traditional military structures. The success provided a model for addressing security challenges that demanded innovative approaches to personnel utilization and resource allocation. The decision to expand the Fort Meridian model to additional facilities was made during the Pentagon briefing, but implementation required coordination between agencies that rarely work together directly. The expansion would test whether innovations developed at a single facility could be replicated at scale while maintaining the security and effectiveness that successful operations required. Back at Fort Meridian, Sarah received notification of her expanded responsibilities through secure channels that indicated coordination at the highest levels of government. Her team would be responsible for training personnel who would lead similar programs at facilities across the military, a responsibility that required developing curricula and procedures that could be implemented consistently while adapting to local operational requirements. The training program development presented challenges that extended beyond technical instruction to include personnel selection and security protocols that would protect sensitive operations while enabling necessary coordination between facilities. Sarah's experience provided insights into requirements that weren't apparent to personnel who hadn't operated in environments where security breaches had life-or-death consequences. Dr. Jennifer Walsh approached the curriculum development with academic rigor that complemented Sarah's operational experience. The training materials needed to provide theoretical foundations while emphasizing practical applications that would enable personnel to develop effective countermeasures under time pressure and resource constraints. The combination of theoretical knowledge and operational experience proved essential for creating programs that could produce competent personnel quickly. Master Sergeant Kevin Thompson coordinated the practical training components that would prepare personnel for the realities of working with classified technologies under operational security constraints. His experience in environments where mistakes weren't survivable provided perspective that ensured training scenarios reflected actual operational challenges rather than simplified academic exercises. The first class of students arrived at Fort Meridian 6 weeks after the Pentagon briefing, representing personnel selected from units across the military based on technical qualifications and security clearances that enabled access to classified materials. The selection process had been rigorous and comprehensive, ensuring that students possessed both the academic background and the personal characteristics necessary for success in demanding operational environments. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, an Air Force intelligence officer with extensive experience in technical analysis, represented the kind of personnel who would lead countermeasure development programs at facilities that supported different operational requirements. Her background in signals intelligence provided expertise that complemented Sarah's equipment modification experience while ensuring that countermeasures addressed threats extending beyond simple technical vulnerabilities. Major David Park, an Army Special Operations officer whose career had included assignments that officially didn't exist, brought operational perspective that ensured training remained relevant to personnel who would employ modified equipment in combat environments. His experience provided reality checks that prevented academic instruction from diverging from practical requirements that determined mission success or failure. Lieutenant Commander James Thompson, a Navy technical specialist whose expertise included classified research programs, contributed knowledge of advanced technologies that could be adapted for countermeasure development. His theoretical background provided foundations for innovations that extended beyond modifications of existing equipment to include development of entirely new capabilities. The diversity of backgrounds represented in the first training class indicated the comprehensive approach that would be necessary for addressing threats that extended across all military services and operational environments. Sarah's team needed to develop training that prepared personnel for challenges that varied significantly based on the specific threats and operational requirements they would encounter. The initial training phase focused on threat assessment methodologies that enabled personnel to identify vulnerabilities that traditional security reviews might miss. Sarah's experience with foreign countermeasures provided examples of how adversaries exploited American operational patterns and equipment limitations, examples that demonstrated the sophistication of threats that countermeasure programs needed to address. The students quickly discovered that effective threat assessment required understanding both technical vulnerabilities and operational patterns that made American forces predictable to adversaries with access to intelligence about equipment capabilities and employment methods. The analysis extended beyond simple technical specifications to include tactical procedures and strategic patterns that could be exploited by adversaries with sufficient intelligence resources. Captain Rodriguez found the operational perspective particularly valuable because her previous experience had focused on technical analysis rather than the practical implications of intelligence compromises. Understanding how technical vulnerabilities translated into tactical disadvantages provided context that enhanced her ability to develop countermeasures that addressed real operational threats rather than theoretical security concerns. The practical training components required students to work with actual equipment that had been modified based on intelligence indicating specific foreign countermeasure capabilities. The hands-on experience provided understanding of how theoretical vulnerabilities manifested in operational environments while demonstrating the effectiveness of countermeasures that had been developed through Sarah's team's analysis. Major Park's operational experience proved essential for ensuring that modified equipment remained practical for personnel operating under combat stress. His feedback prevented modifications that enhanced security at the expense of reliability or usability, ensuring that countermeasures provided genuine operational advantages rather than simply addressing theoretical vulnerabilities. The training scenarios included simulated operations that tested both the effectiveness of countermeasures and the ability of personnel to employ modified equipment under stress. The simulations were designed to replicate operational conditions where equipment failure or security compromises could have catastrophic consequences, conditions that revealed both the strengths and limitations of countermeasure approaches. Lieutenant Commander Thompson's technical expertise enabled evaluation of countermeasure effectiveness against threats that extended beyond current foreign capabilities to include potential future developments. His analysis ensured that innovations developed during training would remain effective even as adversaries adapted their approaches based on ongoing intelligence collection efforts. The training program's success became apparent when students began developing innovations that extended beyond the curriculum to include original solutions to threats that Sarah's team hadn't anticipated. The creative problem-solving demonstrated that the training was developing genuine expertise rather than simply teaching procedures for implementing predetermined solutions. The first major test of student competence came when they were asked to assess equipment that had been captured from foreign forces, equipment that incorporated countermeasures designed to defeat American systems. The analysis required both technical expertise and operational understanding to identify how foreign innovations could be neutralized while determining what American vulnerabilities had been exploited. Captain Rodriguez's analysis revealed that foreign countermeasures were more sophisticated than previous intelligence had indicated, incorporating technologies that suggested access to American research programs that should have remained classified. Her findings required immediate coordination with agencies responsible for investigating security breaches while developing responses that would protect American capabilities from further compromise. Major Park's operational assessment identified tactical implications that extended beyond technical countermeasures to include procedural changes that would deny adversaries the ability to exploit American operational patterns. His recommendations required coordination with training commands that would need to modify instruction programs to address vulnerabilities that conventional training hadn't anticipated. Lieutenant Commander Thompson's technical evaluation revealed opportunities for developing American countermeasures that could exploit foreign vulnerabilities while providing enhanced capabilities for American forces. His innovations required coordination with research programs that could develop and test new technologies under operational security constraints. The comprehensive assessment demonstrated that students had developed expertise that enabled original analysis rather than simply applying predetermined procedures. The success indicated that the training program was producing personnel capable of leading countermeasure development efforts at facilities with different operational requirements and security constraints. Sarah's role evolved from instructor to coordinator as additional training classes arrived at Fort Meridian, while the first graduates began implementing programs at their assigned facilities. The coordination required managing information flow between facilities, while maintaining operational security that protected sensitive programs from exposure to unauthorized personnel. The expansion of countermeasure development programs created new challenges that required innovative approaches to coordination and resource allocation. Facilities with different missions and capabilities needed customized training while maintaining compatibility that enabled cooperation when operations required coordination between multiple organizations. Colonel Morrison found herself managing a facility that had become essential to national security, while maintaining the training programs that remained Fort Meridian's primary mission. The dual responsibilities required careful resource allocation and personnel management that ensured both missions received adequate support without compromising operational security or effectiveness. The success of countermeasure programs began attracting attention from foreign intelligence services that recognized the threat to their operational advantages. Sarah's team identified indicators that suggested foreign efforts to penetrate American countermeasure development programs, efforts that required enhanced security protocols, and counterintelligence measures that extended beyond traditional military security procedures. The foreign interests confirmed the strategic importance of countermeasure development while creating additional security challenges that required coordination with agencies specializing in counterintelligence operations. The protection of American countermeasure capabilities became as important as their development, requiring comprehensive security programs that address threats extending beyond traditional military concerns. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's research into foreign technical capabilities revealed that adversaries were developing countermeasures to American countermeasures, creating a technological competition that required continuous innovation and adaptation. The research indicated that maintaining American advantages would require ongoing development efforts that anticipated foreign responses while providing capabilities that remained effective despite adversary knowledge of American approaches. Master Sergeant Thompson's coordination with operational units revealed that countermeasures were proving effective in actual operational environments, providing American forces with restored advantages while denying adversaries the ability to exploit previously compromised intelligence. The operational success validated the comprehensive approach while demonstrating the practical value of innovations developed through Sarah's programs. The strategic implications of successful countermeasure development became apparent when intelligence indicated that foreign forces were modifying their operational approaches in response to American countermeasures. The adaptations suggested that American innovations were forcing adversaries to abandon tactical advantages they had developed through intelligence compromises, effectively restoring the balance of capabilities that American security required. Admiral Mitchell's strategic assessment confirmed that countermeasure programs were achieving objectives that extended beyond simple technical fixes to include comprehensive restoration of American military advantages. The success provided foundations for addressing future threats while demonstrating that innovative approaches to personnel utilization could provide capabilities that traditional military structures couldn't achieve. The expansion of countermeasure programs to allied nations created additional opportunities and challenges that required careful coordination to protect American technological advantages while providing allied forces with capabilities necessary for collective security operations. Sarah's team developed modified training programs that shared essential countermeasure knowledge while protecting classified technologies that needed to remain restricted to American forces. The international cooperation required developing new protocols for information sharing that balanced operational effectiveness with security requirements, protocols that enabled allied forces to benefit from American innovations while protecting the most sensitive aspects of countermeasure development. The approach provided a model for technological cooperation that enhanced collective security while maintaining American technological advantages. The success of international programs attracted additional foreign interest in American countermeasure capabilities, interest that required enhanced counterintelligence efforts, while providing opportunities to assess foreign technical capabilities through their attempts to penetrate American programs. The intelligence-gathering opportunities enabled development of countermeasures to foreign countermeasures, creating advantages that extended beyond defensive protection to include offensive capabilities. Sarah's reputation as a strategic innovator attracted assignment offers from organizations that coordinated operations requiring the highest levels of technical competence and operational security. The offers represented recognition of expertise that had been developed through unique combinations of operational experience and technical education, expertise that enabled contributions to programs that addressed the most challenging threats facing American security. But Sarah chose to remain at Fort Meridian, where her team continued developing innovations that addressed emerging threats while training personnel who would lead similar programs throughout the military and allied nations. Her decision reflected commitment to building institutional capabilities that would provide long-term advantages, rather than pursuing opportunities that would utilize her individual expertise for short-term objectives. The institutional approach proved prescient when new intelligence revealed that foreign adversaries were developing threats that required countermeasures extending beyond current American capabilities. The threats demanded innovations that could only be developed through comprehensive programs that combined multiple areas of expertise while maintaining the security necessary to protect American advantages from further compromise. The Fort Meridian program provided the foundation for addressing these emerging threats through expanded training programs that prepared personnel for challenges that couldn't be anticipated when traditional military structures were established. Sarah's approach to personnel development created capabilities that could adapt to new requirements while maintaining the standards and effectiveness that successful operations required. 5 years after Sarah's arrival at Fort Meridian, the facility had become the center for a global network of countermeasure development programs that provided American and allied forces with capabilities that neutralized foreign intelligence advantages while creating new opportunities for operational success. The transformation represented successful adaptation to threats that had challenged traditional approaches to military security and effectiveness. The network of trained personnel who had graduated from Fort Meridian programs were leading innovations at facilities across the world, innovations that collectively provided comprehensive responses to threats that no single facility could address independently. The distributed approach enhanced security while providing redundancy that ensured American capabilities would survive potential compromises of individual programs or facilities. Sarah's team continued developing new approaches to countermeasure development while providing oversight and coordination that ensured consistency and effectiveness across the global network. The work required constant adaptation to emerging threats while maintaining the operational security and technical excellence that determined program success or failure. The green beret that had revealed Sarah's qualifications had become a symbol of service that adapted to new requirements while maintaining the standards and commitment that defined military excellence. Her journey from questioned contractor to strategic coordinator demonstrated that expertise could overcome initial resistance, while innovation could address threats that challenged conventional approaches to national security. General Hawkins' final assessment of the countermeasure development programs confirmed that they had achieved strategic objectives that extended far beyond their original scope, providing American forces with restored advantages while creating foundations for addressing future threats that would require similar approaches to innovation and adaptation. The success of Sarah's programs proved that effective responses to emerging threats required personnel utilization and resource allocation approaches that extended beyond traditional military structures, while maintaining the security and effectiveness that successful operations demanded. The model provided templates for addressing future challenges that would require similar combinations of technical expertise and operational experience. Fort Meridian's transformation from routine training facility to strategic innovation center represented successful adaptation to threats that required capabilities that traditional military structures couldn't provide independently. The facility's success demonstrated that excellence could flourish when provided with appropriate recognition and resources, while maintaining the standards that defined military professionalism. Sarah's current assignment involved coordinating countermeasure development programs while mentoring personnel who would lead future innovations addressing threats that couldn't yet be anticipated. Her role had evolved from individual contributor to institutional builder, creating capabilities that would enhance American security long after her direct involvement ended. The work continued with enhanced resources and global scope, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged, ensuring that American forces possessed the capabilities necessary for success in operational environments where adversaries possessed intelligence and technologies that could neutralize traditional advantages. Sarah's programs provided solutions that restored American superiority while adapting to threats that required innovative responses. The concrete walls of Fort Meridian that Sarah had initially been assigned to repair now surrounded facilities that contributed to global security through innovations that addressed some of the most challenging threats facing modern military operations. The symbolism wasn't lost on Sarah. Foundations built properly could support structures that extended far beyond their original purposes, while maintaining the strength and reliability that successful operations required. The mission that had begun with routine logistics coordination had evolved into strategic program management that influenced global security, while demonstrating that competence and innovation could overcome any challenge when provided with appropriate recognition and resources. Sarah's success proved that excellence could create its own opportunities, while building foundations for achievements that extended far beyond individual contributions. The story of Sarah Chen's transformation from questioned contractor to strategic innovator provided a model for addressing future challenges that would require similar approaches to personnel utilization and resource allocation. Her success demonstrated that American military excellence could adapt to emerging threats while maintaining the standards and effectiveness that defined national security capabilities. Colonel Morrison's farewell speech when Sarah was promoted to coordinate global countermeasure programs acknowledged that Fort Meridian's transformation had been accomplished through recognition and utilization of expertise that had been present from the beginning, waiting for appropriate circumstances to reveal its true value. The facility's success proved that excellence could flourish anywhere when provided with proper support and recognition. As Sarah prepared for her new assignment coordinating programs across multiple continents, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible contractor to recognized strategic asset. The transformation had been possible because competence could overcome initial resistance, while innovation could address challenges that seemed insurmountable when viewed through conventional perspectives. The green beret she wore with her new uniform represented service that had taken many forms while maintaining consistent commitment to excellence and national security. Her career demonstrated that effective service required adaptation to changing requirements while maintaining the standards and dedication that defined military professionalism at its highest levels. The future would bring new challenges requiring innovations that couldn't yet be anticipated, but Sarah's programs had created institutional capabilities that could adapt to emerging threats while maintaining the effectiveness and security that successful operations demanded. The foundation had been established for achievements that would extend far beyond any individual contribution, while ensuring that American forces would always possess the advantages necessary for mission success. The work would continue under new leadership that had been trained through programs Sarah had developed, programs that ensured continuity and excellence, while providing capabilities for addressing challenges that would test American security in ways that required the highest levels of innovation and dedication. The institutional approach guaranteed that achievements would survive personnel changes while adapting to requirements that couldn't be predicted when original programs were established. Fort Meridian would continue its dual mission of training military personnel while developing innovations that addressed strategic threats, but the facility would always be remembered as the place where a simple logistics coordinator had revealed capabilities that transformed global approaches to military security and technological competition. Sarah's legacy was measured not in individual achievements, but in institutional capabilities that would enhance American security for generations. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued with expanded scope and enhanced capabilities that reflected successful adaptation to threats that had challenged traditional approaches to national security. Excellence had overcome initial resistance, while innovation had provided solutions that ensured American military superiority would adapt to any challenge while maintaining the effectiveness that successful operations required. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.